Hey everybody, it is Ken here from OpsLevel. At OpsLevel, we make an internal developer portal to help teams quickly ship quality software. And if you know anything about internal developer portals or IDPs, you've probably also heard about an open source alternative named Backstage. OpsLevel integrates with Backstage. We take some of our existing scorecard functionality and allow people to embed that inside of their Backstage instances. And as a result, we have a Backstage plugin and we maintain in our own internal Backstage instance for integration testing. And Mark, who is one of our senior developers here at OpsLevel, recently went through upgrading our internal Backstage instance and our upgrade plugins. And I thought it'd be just a great opportunity to chat with him about some of the challenges with running Backstage. So, Mark, maybe just start. Tell us a little bit about our Backstage setup.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an internal version of Backstage, like you stated, that we use to test the plugins that we write. In Backstage, you need to have several plugins to actually do the functionality we want to do. So we have one for the front end and one for the back end that can actually populate all the data. But in order to make sure those things actually work, we don't just want to shove them out to the wild. So we test it locally on our machines, but we also want to be able to test it on our staging environment, which means that we have an instance that runs the latest version of Backstage. This is a pretty straightforward instance. It's pretty vanilla. There's not a lot going on there, but we still want to keep it up to date. And that way we can make sure that our plugin works with the latest version. And we do some kind of backwards compatibility checking, but we don't necessarily try to support all versions back in history. So we want to keep this relatively up to date. So we aim for roughly quarterly. And in this case, it was from April to October. So that's about on track for quarterly in the tech world.
Okay. Now, you pointed out, right, we recently did go through this upgrade process with Backstage. And in addition to upgrading our Backstage instance in our staging environment, we also upgraded our plugins to use some of the new SDKs that came with that new Backstage instance. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that upgrade went?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little brutal, right? So we upgrading Backstage in that 6 month period, they have gone through what's called the new backend system, which was a big rewrite they did of how plugins actually can integrate with the Backstage system, right? So Backstage is a big platform that you can build an IDP on top of using all of these different plugins, including OpsLevel. So the actual way that that platform integrates with the plugins changed, and we've been keeping up with the betas. We would make sure we're like on top of that as much as we can be. But after the new version dropped, it still had a new step. And I mean, it was a dedicated 1 week to not even touch our plugin, just to get the backend upgraded to the new system, integrating with all of the backend's previous plugins, right? So this is Backstage talking to Backstage plugins, nothing custom out of the box. It is just moving those, and that took about a week to do. For me as a front-end engineer, working mostly by myself.
Wow. And now, is there anything complicated about like our Backstage setup or our Backstage plugins that made this sort of uniquely hard for us? Or is this something that like every team would have had to face?
So I mean, there's nothing complicated. In fact, we by the fact that it's behind a firewall and that it's only accessible to internal people, we can actually turn off some of the harder parts that people complain about, like the authentication and some of the like we can turn on the dangerous forwarding and proxying that needs to happen that they don't recommend doing, and you definitely don't want to do if it's out and facing to the cloud. But I mean, even with that, it still ends up being pretty complicated. I think a lot of people, when they need to do a big rewrite like this, they would just completely blow away their instance and create a new one and then just rehydrate all their data. But obviously, like that's not the direction we want to go. And we want to make sure that our plugin works all the way through the different versions. But at the end of the day, Backstage, kind of like React, is just a ton of different things that are all cobbled together. And all of them mostly talk to each other through versions, but they all support a tiny range. So if those ranges don't overlap, you're kind of in a rough spot moving through.
Got it. So it sounds like our setup actually is sort of easier compared to other setups because we can make some assumptions about not needing auth because of how we've set up our security posture. But uh,
And we have no customization, right? We're not trying to make it look pretty. We're not trying to match our branding. We're not tying into any other external systems that do leverage that data we have. We are completely out of the box. What their template is.
right. So even with just upgrading almost a purely vanilla Backstage instance took, at least a week of time.
Yep.
How much time, do you think if an engineering team is looking to invest in Backstage, how much time do you think that team would need to set up and maintain a Backstage instance?
I mean, those are two very different things, right? For the initial setup, if you don't care about any data showing up, getting it run up and running and kind of deployed out to an environment that's auto updating, I mean, you probably do it in a week, assuming you have a front end person to actually build out all of the like at its core Backstage's Node React and then has a deploy system. So like if you have a front end person to make sure that it looks the way you want it to look, and a back end person to make sure that it actually is connected to Postgres that you have to stand up yourself as well, I bet you could get it done in a week of having it up and running with no data there. The hard part then is I need to start actually building a catalog inside of this thing. And as soon as you start doing a catalog, it's like, well, oh, I actually need search. I need to pull in a plugin for search. I need to do authentication. So I need to integrate with that. Oh, we need to authenticate through Microsoft 365. Now all of a sudden it's a definite other plugin. It's just like stacking all of these things on top of each other. It's like an XKCD about everything's balancing on OpenSSL.
Awesome. Now, Mark, you are a front-end engineer, and you kind of touched on this, but what skill sets do you think are necessary for a team to actually be able to set up and maintain a Backstage instance?
I mean, I think the biggest one is having a front end engineer, and I'm not just saying this for my job security, but you really do like everything in Backstage is a front end component, right? So I'll just React components all the way down. So if you want it to look at all different, right? Like if you want to have like a new column in a table showing your services, you need to have somebody in there modifying front end code. But in addition to that, like you truly are going all the way back down to Postgres, right? Like there's every layer through that process. So, I mean, it's effectively a team. I think if you have like a full stack engineer that feels comfortable navigating databases and like setting up proxy authentications and integrating with ADO and stuff like that, you could do it. But at its core, it's probably like at least a two-person job. And that this is like for running it ongoing, right? Like, this is not a thing that you set up once and then never touch again. It's like I said, we had 66 versions that we had to bump over that period from April to October. And it's a lot. And that's with a pretty like bare bones setup with not really much going on. Like, for context, just to like it's version 125 to version 132 is what we did. And with that, like seven dot versions. It ended up being 66 total versions that changed, 66 different packages that changed in that process.
Wow. So Backstage, very customizable. You brought up this idea that it is, a platform for building your own developer portal, but it does sound like it is
Totally.
a ton of work. So for everyone listening, if you ever need an alternative, come check out OpsLevel. Or if you are in that Backstage hellscape, but looking to add standardization or scorecards, our plugin now works with the latest version of Backstage as well. So we can help you there as well. Please check us out as opslevel.com. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Happy
Sam.
building.